want to make sure that we're bringing stakeholders in, business leaders in to ensure that we're sharing best practices and technology that's being developed for this particular cause. Next slide. So this is the three-legged stool, and you'll notice on the far left, just to clear the chart, the Florida Chamber Safety Council really is the seat of the stool, but it's made up of three really important areas. One is uh, businesses on the committee, and this is really important because we want to make sure that we're becoming very mindful of businesses that not only have experience in this area, but also have the capability to contribute best practices in all industries, whether it's agriculture or construction, entertainment. Heat in the state of Florida or across the nation has an impact on most every vertical, whether you're outdoors or even if you're indoors. The proposed regulations have an impact on both outdoors and indoors. So we want to make sure that we've got a community that's really contributing to this committee that can advise on their specific industry or trends that they're seeing and provide best practices. The middle leg is today it's Disney SyncLink technology, which is what I'm representing. But that stool leg is recommended to change. And so today you're going to get an example and get some best practices from Cesar with Costa Farms, where there's some technology that's been developed from them. So the idea is to embrace the technology development that's happening with these businesses, share those best practices and how that technology can be enabled for the proposed OSHA regulations that have been put in front of us. And then the last is the Florida Chamber Heat Committee, and this is really up to us to make sure that we're advisors and we're driving awareness about the risk associated with heat stress. And there's many different forums and platforms to do that, and we're working really closely not only with Disney but also with the Florida Chamber to ensure that we're embracing those platforms and we're making those available to everyone that's on this call to promote those best practices and potential regulations that need to be followed. It doesn't matter where you are in the journey, but what's important is that you've got a team of stakeholders that can provide you with the resources necessary to get you moving forward. Next slide. Awesome. So this is really exciting for us, and I know during the last call that we had, we really spent some time in the Florida Chamber Safety Council landing page, and this is a set of online resources that are available to you. This is a living, breathing landing page, so we're updating the content in real time as we get it. And just to clear the slide, this is a snapshot of the landing page. This gives you the ability on the far left where it's titled Business Tools to select Business Tools. And this is going to give you all of the documentation, whether it's been the proposed regulations from OSHA. It's going to give you technology tips and different resources that you can use to be able to measure whether it's heat index or wet bulb globe temperature. And we'll talk about that in a minute. It's also going to give you some consolidated one pagers to share what do these proposed OSHA regulations mean to me, and what is the impact of my business, and what are the things that I need to do to make sure that if I'm not following these proposed regulations, I'm starting to get familiar with some of the nomenclature or some of the rules that could be applied. And the work that we've been doing and working closely with Disney really has been all about collecting data to understand what are the heat impacts and what could those impacts be on Disney's cast members as well as guests when they're on property. So all of the documentation that we've been reviewing with the Florida Chamber, we've published on this landing page. So it is full of information. If it feels overwhelming to you, we do have some opportunities to benchmark outside of these heat committee calls and also partner with the Florida Chamber Safety Council to schedule trainings. Our intention is to share and to share as much as we possibly can and to help you navigate through new tools and technology such as the National Weather Service. So you might be wondering, how do I even measure heat index or wet bulb globe temperature? And today there's some free tools that are available to you. If you select the National Weather Service's button that's on the landing page, it's going to take you to a dedicated website that the National Weather Service owns, and it's going to give you those real-time um, heat index conditions that you're faced with. And this is an opportunity to start to get familiar with some of the definitions and the vocabulary that's been proposed by OSHA. But we want to make sure that you've got a daily tool that you can work with, so that if you're in construction and you're in the heat of the summer, you want to make sure that you know what your conditions are and then how you can manage and take care of your employees while they're in the field. So understanding the heat and the current conditions is really important, and that now lives on this landing page. Next slide. Okay, so we wanted to give you just a snapshot of the OSHA timeline, and we'll go back to October 27th, 2021, and this was the initial notice of the proposed rulemaking for heat injury and illness prevention in outdoor and indoor settings that was actually registered. So we'll be able to share this with you, but this will give you some background of the initial notice. And not shortly after, we were introduced to the National Emphasis Program. And this National Emphasis Program was really the precursor to help communicate some of the things that employers need to be mindful of when working in initial or high heat conditions outdoors, or what to be mindful of working in high heat conditions in an indoor facility such as a warehouse. So a lot of what's in the National Emphasis Program is collateral. There's a lot of education material that's available for you. But this is some really good framework to set the stage on things that we need to start to be thinking about. And again, it doesn't matter where you are in the journey, but the emphasis program was really designed to get you started. Um, 2 years later was the proposed heat stress rules. This happened this year, July 2nd. This is currently what's on the table today. There are some very nice one pagers in the landing page that unpacks the proposed regulations very simply for you to go through and understand what sort of things you need to be mindful of in your business. We have until December 30th, which is our notice of comment period. And so that's where the survey comes into place. We're really working closely with the Florida Chamber to extract things that we're looking to not necessarily debate, but potentially push back on. So we're collecting data, and we've got some really good information and evidence on some of the rulemaking and the impacts it could have on employers. So we want to hear from you. So feel free to take that survey as we start to collect all of those potential impacts on your business. And really, what you're going to be required to do is um, you're going to be required to conduct regular heat risk assessments. So what that means is you're going to have to get familiar with measuring heat index or wet bulb globe temperature. And those are two forms of monitoring the temperature in your workplace. And monitoring the temperatures in your workplace is important, and also being able to maintain that information so that you can avoid any risk for potential preventative measures that you may take. So being educated and being trained on how to do that is that's why we're here, to give you some best practices and tips on collecting those current heat conditions, whether it's heat index or wet bulb temperature. Um, and then also, establishing a heat illness prevention plan. And you're going to hear from Cesar here in a moment. We've been working, really closely with internal lines of business, frankly, around the world with Disney to kind of understand those prevention plans and pulling out some of our best practices and being able to share those with companies like Costa Farms. Using existing emergency medical response today, but adding in some new language that talks about heat stress and educating employers on heat stress. Um, Also, record keeping and reporting. It's really important that as you start to learn some of the tools that are available for you to capture the current heat index or the current wet bulb globe temperature reading, it's important for you to keep records of that. And most of the applications that we're suggesting today give you a database so that you can start to log that data. And so if you were asked what was the conditions on November 10th, you could quickly go back in time and share what those conditions were. And then within your prevention plan, you would be able to articulate that we had a shaded break area or that we had water on site, so that you could answer any questions that may come to you. Um, Providing breaks during high heat conditions. This is something that is really important that we want to make sure that we educate on, because there's initial heat conditions, and there's high heat conditions, and there's going to be some required break times that are responsible in these regulations. So we want to make sure that we give you really good insight on that. And I know that Cesar will talk about some best practices at Costa Farms on that as well. So the last, and you can go to the next slide, is to really provide that graduated acclimation period for newer returning workers. So if you think about evaluating heat hazards, and you're hearing some of these new terms, which is the heat index or wet bulb globe temperature. These are really the two ways that you would actually monitor the heat conditions. And number one that we've been paying very close to in the regulations is utilizing wet bulb globe temperature readings, as well as NIOSH. And there's some information that we'll share with you, but this is a little softer approach where it does give you initial heat triggers. So initial is defined as 80 degrees or greater. That's the initial heat. That's when recommended alert limits start to happen. And then high heat triggers are 90 degrees and greater. And with monitoring through wet bulb globe temperature and following the NIOSH, it really allows you to have some flexibility, because it allows you to input your recommended exposure limits. So it could be moderate work with light clothing. And when you're with moderate work with light clothing working outside, there's some adjustments where you're not going to be required to take maybe as many breaks if you're measuring just straight up heat index with those temperatures over 80 or 90 degrees. So that's really important. We'll touch that on the next slide. But learning about WBGT and learning about heat index is really going to give you a great baseline to determine, how do you want to measure, or what's the most beneficial way for you to measure the current heat conditions outdoors or indoors. And then there's a lot of data on the acclimatization um, period as well. And this is something that we just wanted to bring up front and center, is that in those regulations that are being proposed, it's suggesting that if it's your first week on the job, and you've never been exposed to these conditions, you're going to be required to take a 15-minute break every 2 hours. Or if you don't want to do that, then you would have a gradual heat exposure increase, that would be 20%, 40%, 60%, or 80%. So it gets you acclimated to those conditions. Very similar to how high school football works. When you show up for summer practices, you just don't go out and spend 4 hours of practice. You have an acclimatization period, so that you're acclimated with the current weather conditions. Um, there are exceptions to that we're looking at, which is if an employer can demonstrate that employees' working conditions within the past 14 days are similar, then obviously you would not have to go through the acclimatization period. Break areas for outdoor sites, they must have either artificial or natural shade, or AC if it's in an enclosed space. So those break areas are really critical for outdoors. And keep in mind that um, commuting to and from that outdoor area for that assigned break time does not qualify for the 15-minute break. That drive time to and from is actually in addition to the 15 minutes. So we're paying really close attention to what that looks like in various lines of businesses for outdoors and then indoor facilities as well. Next slide. Okay, so this is something that I want to cover quickly, and then I'll get the mic over to Caesar. But just to clear this chart, this is an example of taking one of the hottest days on the planet, July 22nd, 2024, and if you were just measuring with heat index, and measuring with heat index has two it has an initial heat and then a high heat that you would have to take actions on. So on the left side we've got the high heat and the initial heat, and then all of the provisions that you just must be mindful of and doing regardless of what those heat levels are. But this is a day where we were in a really a high heat condition for the entire day. So in any given 8-hour work day, on this day, you were responsible out of this 9-hour day to take 4 15-minute rest breaks, because that's what would have been required if you would have been measuring with heat index. And so that really gives you a total rest break of 60 minutes, in addition to all of the provisions. So let's talk about those provisions. One, you have to be measuring heat index. You have to be aware of the current initial and high heat conditions. Two, you got to make sure that you've got that emergency response procedure and plan ready to go, and really organized so that when action needs to be taken, your employees or supervisors are trained on that, and then they can implement any of the heat injury or illness prevention plan that needs to be executed. And then obviously record keeping. And like I said, a lot of that is now available in some of the technology that we're introducing to give you record of what were those initial or high heat conditions on that particular day. In this day, it was a high heat condition for the entire day. So ensuring that drinking water is available. There are some rules around having portable units or bottled water. Those are areas that we're also exploring as well. Having a dedicated break area. Ensuring that you've got indoor work area controls, and you can have some dedicated space for indoor where employees can go to. That what that acclimatization plan is for new or returning workers. This is an area that we're really working closely with the Florida Chamber on, because obviously throughout the year, if employees are taking vacations, these are new conversations that we're having about the location potentially that they're going to, and is there a need for an acclimatization period when they return. So there's a lot of new learnings in that area. And then I think for us to collectively as a group on this heat committee, it's just making sure we're sharing best practices and having effective communication with employees, and learning new ways to introduce supervisor or buddy systems to observe those signs or symptoms that is being presented. So there's a lot of resources and tools, and we've unpacked everything that we're working closely with the Florida Chamber on, especially with Disney, to make those tools and resources available to you on the landing page. So we will go to the next slide. And this is a recap. So again, this is just a simple snapshot of the proposed heat safety rules that are going to be required. So just keep these in mind. Maybe take a screenshot or take a picture with your smartphone. You'll be amazed on how all of these bolded topics are being reviewed, and the benchmarking that the Florida Chamber and Disney has been doing with Costa Farms. I think you'll get some great best practices. So, Crystal, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Brent. Now we'll pass it over to Cesar Martinez. He's the Senior Director of Environmental Health and Safety at Costa Farms. Cesar will share a detailed case study with us on Costa Farms' approach to heat safety, focusing on their proactive strategies and innovative measures that they've implemented to protect their employees. Cesar, I'll pass it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Crystal. Can you guys hear me all right? Yep. Okay, good. Before we get started, real quick, so I want to caveat what Katie said. Veterans Day, right? Thankful for all of you, those veterans that are out there, for your service. Very much appreciated. And I know Brett said get into the details. that can be subjective. So don't take it at face value, but we'll do the best we can to kind of share our journey, a journey that we're very proud of. So next slide. A quick agenda. Okay. I think it's pertinent for us to kind of share our foundational pillars with regards to safety, not just heat. Obviously why heat is important to us. We're agriculture, but it's important to everybody, right? And then where we've gone and where we're going. So when you look at Costa Farms, right? So our foundational pillars as a business are in the little block to the left, right? So all those pillars, safety, procurement, resource management, growing asset care, are supported by our most valued resource, which is the team. Okay. And we have a system called Costa Production System. It mirrors the Toyota production system, Procter and Gamble. So all these manufacturers have these production systems. We do the same. Now with safety, our foundational pillars are based upon three categories, right? Behaviors, compliance, and enhancing capabilities, which is just a fancy word for saying training. So I just want to provide some context as we get into the meat of heat. So next slide, Crystal. So the safety journey. Sure, everybody has probably seen this slide. Really, it's not heat specific as much as it is just the journey as a whole. When I look at us from Costa Farms, obviously we're big into behaviors, right? Which is that commitment culture. Okay. We want people to work safe because they want to be safe and go home to what's important at the end of the day, their family and friends. But when I look at us as an organization, we're somewhere between performing and excelling, depending upon what category we're talking about. But it's a continual evolvement process, improvement process for us. So next slide. Okay, so why is heat important to us? First and foremost, we like to look at things. You'll hear me say it probably multiple times, right? Coming from a place of caring, okay? We would not be able to do what we do without our people, period, okay? So when we look at safety items such as the heat, the heat proposal or just heat in general, because we've been dealing with heat even before, OSHA started with the NEP. We try to come from a place like, hey, what's best for our people, right? So you can see the first bullet there is ensuring our most valued resource is safe and healthy is paramount to us because it is, okay? We're farmers. We work in hot environments. It's a part of our daily routine. We can't hide from it. We can't run from it. We can hope for a cool front, but with a large part of our organization being in the southern part of the state of Florida, cool can be subjective because January can still be very warm even in South Florida. So we have to learn to work with it, okay? Heat and humidity is a key input for our product, which are plants. Okay. We can't grow good plants without heat and humidity. Okay. We do some perennials and annuals, which favor a little bit chillier weather, but a large segment of our business is tropical foliage, and heat and humidity is a key input to that quality of that product. And again, we need to learn to work with heat because it's not going anywhere. Okay. Digging deeper. All right, we'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit, but that's kind of what led to the collaboration that Brett has referenced between us and Disney and Brett. And it has been an eye opener for me, and kind of gave us a focus to the path that we wanted to go as we look to improve our processes, right? And then obviously, unfortunately, but we live in a society where there's scrutiny and political pressures, whether that's OSHA, whether that's outside influence on our workforce. So we have to be mindful of that, but we don't dwell on that because again, I go back to the first bullet. We want to make sure our people are safe, and we're very proud about how we go about doing it. So next slide. Okay, so where have we been? Some things that we've done. The little thing you see to your left there, right? So we established what we call the Costa Farms 10 Golden Rules. Oh man, it's probably been about 6 or 7 years ago. Okay. And we looked at it basically based upon where our most exposure was, okay, based upon our metrics of looking at our issues that we had, our incidents, and we defined 10 golden rules, and then it became a branding effort across the enterprise to really push those, okay? Well, we rebranded it this year to add one about heat, and it is number 9, and I'm sorry you can't read it, but basically the first bullet you see there, rush to beat the heat, okay? And so we rebranded the 10 golden rules to add the heat element in there. We did a big campaign over the summer. Rush stands for rest under shade and I'm sorry, rest under shade and hydrate, okay, is what RUSH stands for. So we're big on marketing, not marketing, but branding, okay, when we have safety initiatives, because the more awareness you have, the better off you're going to be. Training, okay. We linked up with FDAX. If you don't know what FDAX stands for, that's the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. They are an outfit that we lean on for multiple things, but training is one of them, okay? And we established probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, three years ago at least, doing an annual heat stressor training across the enterprise. So it's done annually. It's obviously done when we have new hires, but we do training annually, and we started it several years ago. Okay. And then first aid CPR training. Okay. That's also big to us. We like clockwork, okay? Depending upon when somebody's certification will go up. We do first aid and CPR training. You'll hear me talk about a nurse practitioner. We have an on-site clinic, and she provides some training as well about the symptoms of heat, about the wellness, okay? Don't drink the Red Bulls, drink water, the proper nutrition, all those good things. But we'll talk about that more in a little bit. How we get that out there. So every day is a part of our Costa production system. Every one of our employees, okay, are meeting as a group in their work area in what we call a 5-minute huddle. That's the first thing they do every day after they clock in. And in that 5-minute huddle, they discuss three things: safety, quality, and productivity. Okay. And we use that 5-minute huddle as a way to communicate daily, okay, and keeping the awareness fresh. They will talk about incidents that may have happened the day before. They may talk about some new safety hazard that has come up that we weren't tracking. And then obviously on these boards, they go over metrics for quality and productivity and safety. We have it sitting right in front of them, drink water, hydrate, signs and symptoms of heat. So that's the way we do that, to get that out there on a daily basis. Okay. The next bullet there, Acosta nurse practitioner. So we made the decision about 3 years ago to put an on-site clinic. It was not born out of the heat proposal that was coming. It was not born out of we've got a lot of injuries. It was born out of the thing that I started this whole thing off with, and that is caring for our people, right? We could have cared less whether this was a cost plus, a cost neutral. It didn't matter to us, right? We felt, because of our large population of employees in South Florida, that having an on-site clinic to deal with our people and issues would be a game changer, and it has been. Okay. And part of that has been that we hired the right nurse practitioner. She's the best. And as a part of this heat program, she goes out training. She's got some boards that show don't drink the Red Bull. I mean, the things that I spoke to, right? So she's been a part of that campaign of training. And obviously, she is our first line of defense, unless it's a 911. And knock on wood as I say that, if we have somebody that's showing some signs of heat symptoms, we get them to the clinic. Major capital investments. So we made the decision about 5 or 6 years ago to really upgrade our break rooms. I won't share with you the numbers, but it was large, okay? And we did it over the course of several years. So we have a lot of good break rooms with air conditioning, refrigerator, cold. I mean, you name it, right? I mean, we're spending a lot of time out in the sun, out in the field, but we have a place for all of our people to get to that meet the criteria as what's being proposed in the NEP. And then again, we created a heat policy. It's a continual improvement process, but it mirrors very much the NEP. Maybe a little subjective, and we're not saying you have to do this now, but we're kind of piloting it to see if we did do it, what would it look like? So next slide. Just want to share with you real quick. I'm not advocating that everybody needs to go out there and spend the money to get a clinic, but I can tell you, if you can afford to make that initial capital investment and the additional payroll, if your business is large enough, it truly has been a game changer. I can't stress to you enough how much of a game changer it has been for us at Costa Farms. And what you're looking there is a picture, and literally when you walk in there, you will think you're at a doctor's office. Okay. And that's what we wanted. So next slide. Yeah, so big believer in DMAC, lean, right? Where you're constantly, CIP stands for continual improvement process. Okay, so as we have evolved in some of those things that I spoke to, okay, I felt like we were in a good position. We felt like we were in a good position, okay? But we want, how do we raise the bar? What's next, okay? Well, I attended a Florida Chamber seminar back in May, I think it was, and listened to Greg Hale with Disney give a speech on heat, and the light bulb went off. Okay. And it was something that I had been thinking of, but there was multiple problems to solve for in our industry and what we do. Um, but he kind of brought that wide range into a narrow focus, and the collaboration started. So the first bullet there, collaborating with Greg and Brent, started pretty much after that meeting. Um, I told them from day one, plagiarizing was allowed unless an NDA was signed, so they knew I was going to steal ideas, and they were gracefully okay with that. Um, the concept was generated for real-time monitoring, right? So we've always kind of had monitoring from a standpoint of open source, whether that's WeatherBug, whether that's the NWS and all these different apps and websites. But we wanted to look at it from a real-time monitoring and alerting system down at the microclimate level. And what I mean by microclimate, if you look at our operations in Miami, there's 52 sites, okay, spread out over about 10 square miles, okay? And any of you guys that live in Florida, I think you all do, but you know that, it can be pouring and thunderstorming, 2 miles down the road, and you're sitting there sweating in the sunshine. So we wanted to try to tackle this from a microclimate standpoint at all of our facilities. That's when I looped the innovation team in, and we started piloting. Okay, we started piloting. We met on some still meet, but some sort of cadence with Greg and Brett. Share what we're doing. They give us some feedback. Um, Variables were defined as far as technology that worked for us. And one thing we realized is we already had a lot of technology out there in the field that was measuring heat, measuring humidity, because we use them for our product and growing. Okay, through some of our environmental control systems and so forth, so on. So we're like, hey, before we go spend a lot of money, why don't we just leverage what we have out there in the field? So the last bullet there, the collaboration has turned into so much more than it has, and I can't thank Greg and Brett enough in being gracious to deal with the innovation team member and myself and picking their brains constantly. So looking to continually improve, and that's what led us to this. Next slide. So where we're going. So, one thing I want to share is, so the biggest variable to solve for, when Brett was talking about wet bulb versus heat index, we've got three growing environments, and you can see in the pictures on the left, we have full sun, we have shade, and then we have, what we call a greenhouse, right? Which can be a polycarbonate roof, it can be a poly roof, but basically an indoor, okay? So we were looking at all the different things and like, hey, do we use one another? Do we use something different over here? We finally settled on the wet bulb, global temperature is our main input for alerts. Okay, because we have a lot of technology already existing in our greenhouses, but also it was the less restrictive, and I say that cringing my eyebrows when you look at the proposals, right? And you look how wet bulb compares to a heat index. I think it allows us as employers a little bit more flexibility, especially in hot environments like Florida, than the heat index does. Plus, and the most important thing, it's a true representation of how a body is affected, right? Because it takes into effect solar radiance, it takes into effect clouds, it takes into effect wind. Okay, and we know in Florida that you can get a breeze, and it can mean a lot in how it affects a person's physiology with regards to heat. So we settled on that. Um, Again, we felt like it was a better measurement for us. So how we do it, so we use some of the existing technology that we have in the field, okay, measuring humidity and measuring temperature. And then we use open source, okay, meaning that the National Weather Service, so forth, so on, and we do a calculated version, okay? You can go buy the wet bulb globe temperature sensors, okay? If you're as big as we are, as far as how many you would need to get a true microclimate thing, it was probably going to be very expensive. Okay. So we did it with what we have, and then we are buying a few more sensors to get, a little bit better footprint. but then we did the calculated version, and we ran a pilot, and you see the next to the last bullet there. We ran comparison trials on our calculated versus our real time. And at all times during that pilot, and we did it for several weeks, we were within about 1% accuracy. So we felt very good about that, and hence Costa Heat Shield was born. Next slide. Yeah, so this is kind of a messy slide, but I just want to share with you. So this is some of the alerting that goes on. Again, subroutines was wrote in the upper left-hand corner, but we can send the alert out to the email or, as you see on the right-hand side, via text, okay? Obviously, we can change the variable where we want it to trigger, but, right now, and if you go to the next slide, Crystal, please. Yeah, so this is where we're currently at, okay? And that is specific location heat alert implementation. We, after settling on wet bulb, feeling very good about the direction we want to go, we're now in the process of purchasing the rest of our technology to do an enterprise rollout in 2025. We have farms all the way to Virginia. Obviously, we're going to start with where our greatest risks are, and that's in South Florida, and then move north. But our goal will be by the end of 2025 to have the technology deployed, have the alerting system set up, okay, have the temperatures defined, which we have them right now, and they're pretty much mirroring what NEP is saying, okay? And then I, as a leader at Costa Farms, having people working in a specific area can get an alert to my phone or email or both, okay, saying, hey, this is happening, okay, meaning that this temperature has come to here, so it triggers the next event, okay, whatever the event may be, whether that's 15 minutes of rest every hour work, which I know is not necessarily a plausible thing, but just, speaking in kind of hypothetical situations, but we want to have that alert system up, and we feel like by the end of next year, that we will be in a good place to say that, hey, we have it implemented. A couple things to share with you, right? You know, the next to last bullet there, right? Some other things that we're doing is, can we change our work environment? Okay, can we bring work to people? For so long, and me included, hey, the day starts at 7 and it ends at 5 or 5:30 or 6, and does it have to? Can we start looking at working in cooler times of the day at night? Can we maybe, instead of having people go into the field, can we put technology in the field and bring the work to them in cooler environments? So those are some of the things that we're still in discussion about, but right now, the big one is the implementation enterprise-wide in 2025 of Costa Heat Shield. So next slide. Yeah, so that is our journey, and what you're seeing there, I always like to put this at the end of a presentation, is because one of our farms is sitting in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, and it's one of my favorite places to go. It is absolutely beautiful. So that's our journey. I hope I didn't talk too fast, and I hope I kind of gave you maybe a little overview of where we were and where we're going, and why we did what we did. But one thing I will share with any of the businesses listening on here, man, just like Brett and Greg have done with us at Costa, we're an open book, and there's nothing more satisfying to me than collaborating to either help others out or learning something from you all. So if anybody's interested, just reach out. Crystal, that's all I got. Turn it over back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cesar, for sharing those valuable insights. It's really inspiring to see the proactive measures that Costa Farms has implemented to prioritize heat safety. So thank you so much for that, Cesar. And now we'll transition into our group discussion and Q&A segment. And I see we have a few questions that have came through. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Brent, Katie, and Cesar, you guys have your cameras on, and then we'll get started. We'll dive right in. Cesar, I have a question for you that came through. Can you share what are some challenges Costa Farms faced in creating and implementing a heat illness prevention plan, particularly with local or state regulations?
Yeah, because here's the thing, right? Nothing is signed into law, okay? And so again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, right? We try to come from a place of what's best for our people. So even though we obviously are keeping a ear low to the ground and keeping up with what's being proposed and providing our input as we can to try to shape that for us. Our biggest thing was how do we set up an alerting system to scale? Okay. I mean, we've got, like I said, 52 sites down in Miami for a total of about 2,000, 2,500 acres. Okay. With everything that you can imagine. So that was challenging, but it really the collaboration with Brett and Greg kind of got us say, hey, wait a minute, we've got some infrastructure in place. Let's utilize that. So it was taking that and building upon it. And then, the acclimatization, I mean, the interruption to the workday, it still causes us pause of how we tackle that. We're still in discussions about what that may look like. And we're contemplating doing some piloting to kind of see what the end product would look like if we have to go down those roads for the acclimatization and the interruption of the work hour. So
Yeah, and Crystal,
Great,
I'll
Cesar.
just tag on to what Caesar mentioned about, I think we've all been working with a diverse range of stakeholders that's comprised of, many different organizations such as the Florida Chamber nationwide, and just kind of advocating best practices. But what he just said is really something that I think we're all experimenting with is those what if situations, taking those extreme conditions with a line of business, a high heat condition, and modeling if in fact you are hit with 90 degrees or greater, what would you do based on these proposed regulations, and really mock that scenario up and look at the holes. And it's okay because we've all got holes that we're identifying, but it's important to not be surprised of that, and then also start to plan accordingly for the journey that you're on, and what resources that you need to plug those holes.
Great. Thank you, Brent. And while we have you right now, there was one question that did come through for you. For businesses or varying sizes that are starting to prioritize heat safety, what are some immediate steps you would recommend to ensure they're on the right track for compliance?
Yeah, great question. And I don't think there's any bad place to be in the journey. And I'll go back to where we started, which is just the data collection. It's learning the vocabulary of what is heat index, what is wet bulb globe temperature, what are the proposed regulations that are sitting in front of us, and why is this comment period so important. So once you start to get a better understanding of the definitions and how to measure heat index or wet bulb globe temperature. It's a mouthful. It's still a mouthful for us today, but it starts to get you comfortable with some resources that are available, like the National Weather Service. There's many different mobile applications and technology that you can use to look at, heat index or wet bulb globe temperature, but we want to recommend what we've been using, and some of the technology that's available to give you some indication of what those conditions are uh, in your working environment. And that's the next step after really understanding the definitions and the data. And then from there, it's really starting to unpack those proposed rules. And we've got great resources for you on the Florida Chamber landing page that this heat committee has put in front of you. Download those documents. They're really simple reads, but it's an opportunity for you to go through and as we mentioned, if you mock a day in the life of that high heat conditions, what do you have established today, and what is it that you need? So that'll really start your checklist of what you need to potentially implement. And then at the end of the day, as Caesar mentioned, none of this is in law yet, but if all of this were to be entered into law, at least you are absolutely prepared and even implementing, some of these best practices that we've all adopted thus far. There's many really good best practices in here because we want to keep our employees safe. We want them to go home safely and make sure that they have the right resources, whether it's outdoor or indoors.
Thank you, Brent. And Katie, just hearing from Cesar and Brent, could you explain the Florida Chamber Safety Council's role in helping Florida businesses navigate the new OSHA regulations on heat safety?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the question. Our advisory board, which made some of the top leaders in safety, health, and sustainability, is really taking best practices and ideas like Cesar talked about, and how do we push those down market to the mid to small size companies and partner with them and help them be resourced to be able to have the sort of knowledge and expertise that we have at some of our flagship Florida organizations like Disney and Costa Farms. And so we have a senior vice president that leads the Florida Chamber Safety Council, Jason Mozo, is looking to really be in the field with our mid to small size organizations and create the connection on some of the best practices and learnings and knowledge sharing amongst all organizations in the state of Florida. So if you have any questions, if you would looking for resources, connections, policies, procedures, any sort of implementation like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll connect you with Jason and start to create sort of this thought leadership think tank on how we can have consistency across the board and ultimately lead the nation on heat stress and heat illness prevention in the country.
Thank you for that, Katie. And I will actually drop Jason's contact information in the chat for anyone that is interested in reaching out and speaking to Jason more in terms of the Florida Chamber Safety Council. And as we begin to wrap up, I have time for one more question. And Cesar, this one is for you. Could you share some insights or advice for other businesses who are just starting to develop or even refine their heat safety plans, especially for those outside of agriculture?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for asking. Look, at the end of the day, and it's going to sound like a broken record, right? But if you put the regulatory aside, man, if you come from a place of like what's best for our people, okay? I mean, it's kind of like running a horse race, right? So you want your people at their strongest, okay? So if you look at heat and how heat, and this is one of the things that I've learned through our collaboration with Greg and Brett is the physiology point, right? Which is something we want to get to, and understanding the physiology and how it affects people working in the heat. But, going back to the question, if you just come from a place of caring and what's best for people, I think you kind of answer your question. And the next one is look for your pinch points. We're big into metrics. We're in agriculture, we're farmers, but we kind of measure ourselves like we're in a manufacturing facility. Matter of fact, if you look at all our metrics with regards to safety, we're comparing ourselves to manufacturing, not ag, because the bandwidth in ag is a lot larger than manufacturing. But if you understand where your pinch points are, and when I say pinch points, I'm not being literal, but where your exposures are, I think it kind of helps you define what that process should look like, right? So coming from a place of what's best for our people and then understanding where your highest risks are, will kind of help define what that road looks like.
Well, thank you so much, Cesar and Brent and Katie. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and so we will have a recorded session sent out to everyone, including the slides for anyone that has asked in the chat. I just want to thank you guys again for answering those questions today. And I would like to pass it off to Katie to wrap us up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, everybody. Cesar, thank you very much. Brent, thank you very much for your time and being with us today. I really appreciate everybody's insightful questions and active participation today. As we look forward, I just want to remind everybody of some important next steps. You heard Cesar mentioned, attending a Florida Chamber event and some of the best practices that we've had. And that is really what the Florida Chamber Leadership Conference on Safety, Health, and Sustainability is meant to be. We hope everybody can join us next May 15th and 16th at Disney's Contemporary Resort. But this is really meant to bring everyone together to share best practices and thought leadership in the realm of heat safety, mental health, sustainability across Florida, because ultimately we are trying to set the standard in the nation on how we become the safest, healthiest, and most sustainable state in America. So with that, hope you can attend in May, and also really would like everyone to continue to join us on our heat committee meetings as we continue to talk about economic impact around heat, as well as best practice sharing and knowledge sharing, and really create the connection with everybody to help everybody be better. And as Cesar has so eloquently said, think about our people and putting them first and what's best for them. So with that, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Cesar. Thank you, Brett, for your time today, and look forward to continuing to engage everyone on this very important topic.
Thank you.